start the stream since everybody probably needs to know. Well, actually, online students, it doesn't matter because I'll have their test up for them prior. So, to avoid having to redo all this, I'm just going to yank these over. Where'd my schedule go? Did I close it? I must have closed it. That's what I get. Alright, hold on. Right, so, yoink. Since this is fall break, Thanksgiving break, and then it's exams, just as a reminder, the 24th is when the final papers due, but we will still be here the 1st of December for light review day. Did I get an email? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, no, I got a thing. Yeah, so, but, where am I supposed to go? So for online students, since I give you guys like a week to do your exam, which by the way, try to get that done as early as possible, I'm going to like drop it on that Tuesday because I have to have the grades in by that next Tuesday. So you're going to have that whole week and the weekend to get it done. Because if you don't, cool, you get a 0. That's all I can do for you. But for my many in-person students here, here's the in-person schedule. And this will apply for all your in-person classes. Up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Okay. So, a couple of things. You may notice, our exam is that next Monday. We're one of the few, actually, I don't think anybody actually has a test on that Tuesday. So Monday is like the last day of exams, technically, or at least when people actually meet for exams, which is definitely the day you don't want to have to come in for that. So what we can do, I mean, unless you're going to be busy both Wednesday and Friday of the previous week, you can just come in on either of those days and take your 103 exam and get it over with, rather than having to come in on 8:30 a.m. on a Monday. And then I can just go ahead and get it graded. If you can't, that's cool. I mean, even if you have like an exam on one of these blocks, if you get it done before 10:30, just come back in here and I can do it, because I'm not doing anything after. So even if it goes over a little bit, well, hell, Wednesday or Friday, because Thursday is the only day that I've actually got to go do my other job. So yeah, I'm free both of those days beyond 10:30. So nobody's going to be in here. And if you want to wait until Monday, that's fine. I don't care. But we're going to have room. My other classes are bigger than this one, but they're not full by any measure. In fact, I could fit all 3 classes in here and have plenty of room. So, yeah, you're more than welcome to come either the Wednesday, Friday, or that last day, Monday. Just let me know kind of in advance what you're looking at, what you want to do, so I'll know whether I need. Because if I don't have to come in that next Monday, I just won't. I'll just go ahead and get the stuff graded and be done with it, you know. Just go ahead and get it done that Wednesday. Might as well, right? Um, yeah, because we'll have reviewed that Monday. Tuesday's reading day, and then get it done that Wednesday. Yeah, might as well. And I'll see what Cammy wants to do, and that'll be the whole class. um, right. Okay. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and. So, um, yeah, I think that's mainly it. Again, for most of my class, which are online, this doesn't really matter. I'll put the exam up um, on Blackboard like I usually do the test, and you guys can handle it up there. Let's see. Now, we did actually get a little bit done on Monday. Not like a full class period. Kimmy still had to do her second test, so she did like that during like the first part of the first part of the class, and then we did some notes. Unfortunately, as my online students may have noticed, I neglected to turn the mic on for that period of notes. So I had to go back home, or rather my parents' house where I'm taking care of the animals, and re-record it with a parakeet screaming in the next room. So I don't know how well that came out in terms of audio. So hopefully it's doable for my online students. Anyway, we're getting back into the early Middle Ages. We and just I mean it's 10 slides, so we did monks and monasteries and their manuscripts that they copied, and papacy, and Pope Gregory specifically, bishops and saints, which is all online. And then like how kingship worked, and then now specifically post Clovis, because remember Clovis was the relatively powerful. Well, I'll say relatively. He had a lot going on. He was the powerful king of the Franks. However, due to the way Germanic inheritance was handled, his land was split among all of his sons, and rather than each take a piece of it and be happy with parts of like the biggest kingdom in Europe at the time, they murdered each other until only one was left. And then once this guy died, his sons did the same thing. So it kept weakening the Merovingian line until we had some other nobility underneath the Merovingians start to rise to power, which we'll get to later today, which is very, very important for the future of Europe. Now, that said, I had mentioned before that Clovis was very important to the future of Europe. Yes, because he created the Merovingian line, which itself is necessary for the creation of the later Carolingian line. But the Merovingian line has to die first. So sorry, Clovis, your descendants suck. We have to replace you. But they had to set the groundwork anyway. Anywho, quick detour. We got to talk about Islam because, well, we're going to get to the Crusades here before too long. So we got to talk about where they're going and what they're doing and who they're fighting against. So, real quick crash course on the beginning of Islam. We had Muhammad, who was the merchant of Mecca down in Arabia. He received messages from God in 610. Now, this was, again, this is very, very, very simplified, but like how in Christianity, it's like, okay, well, Judaism is still, well, it depends on who you talk to, because, I mean, some Christians don't believe that Catholics are Christians, so what do you know? But, like, most Christians are like, okay, well, the Jews worship the same God we do, but they just don't carry it on to Jesus, which is why the Old Testament is just, it's just the Torah. It's just the Jewish holy book. Give or take, there are a couple of books that aren't in there that may be in the Torah that aren't in the Old Testament. Again, depending on the translation, there's a lot of differences. But regardless, more or less, for Muhammad, it was the same way. Judaism, Christianity, great, but they weren't quite complete. There was another step beyond Jesus in his mind. So a couple of terms here. You've got the Ummah, which were the community that grew up around him, the community of believers that grew up around his ideas of Islam. The word Islam means submission to the will of God, which, yeah, okay. I mean, Christianity more or less means, followers of Christ, which you could translate to submitting to the will of Christ if you wanted to. And so a Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of God, therefore a follower of Islam. That's what all that means. More importantly, at least in terms of the test, the Hijra, I think that's how that's pronounced, this happened in 622 when Muhammad had to flee from Mecca to Medina because the people were running him out of town. And this is like year 1 of the Islamic chronology. So the Islamic calendar is 622 years behind the Gregorian calendar, just due to when it starts. Because that's like their major moment, is this fleeing from Mecca, going to Medina, and truly starting Islam like as a proper separate religion, I guess. Also, we have the Quran, which has multiple different spellings, because, I mean, this is what the writing looks like. So the spelling ain't gonna matter a whole lot. It depends on kind of how we interpret the sounds as our, Latin letters. So you've got, Q-U-R apostrophe A-N, or not apostrophe, or just K-O-R-A-N. They're both considered accurate anglicized translations of Quran. So, good enough. Okay. Basic beliefs. There's 5 pillars of Islam. There's only one God. Now, in Islam, God is called Allah, which just means God. Like, again, you have certain groups that are like, oh, they worship a false god. It's like they just call him Allah. Like, that's not even a name. That's not like Yahweh in Judaism, where that is literally God's name. But it was specifically meant to be unpronounceable in ancient Hebrew. Whereas in Christianity, we just use God, which is more of a title than a name. Allah is just Arabic for God. That's all it means. There's only one God and he must be obeyed. Cool, that's like the first commandment. That sounds real familiar. 2, Muslims are obliged, to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. Okay. Which, I mean, it ends up kind of being more of a cultural thing because it's so ingrained in their culture. So like they have to know which way Mecca is, and like schedule out their day because I mean 5 times a day that's a lot. Um, I've seen some things online where like because um, Muhammad uh, liked cats and he had a lot of cats around, and there's a couple of like legendary stories of um, like he was wearing a robe because again this is like the 600s and they're in Arabia, so like Old Testament style robes were still very much in vogue. um, and he was sitting there, and the cat was like laying on his robe, and it was time to get up and go pray. But he didn't want to disturb the cat, so he found like a knife or a pair of scissors and cut his robe out from under the cat, so the cat still had a place to lay, and he didn't disturb the cat. And then like went to pray, which is, if you've ever owned a cat, that's how cats are. Um, and then I've seen stuff online where like, because typically when they go to pray, they're like all the way down on the ground, and so they have like prayer rugs to be on because the ground's hard. And cats like laying on rugs, and they will get in the way, especially if you're on the rug. And apparently they sell like little, like genuinely little book-sized prayer rugs for cats to get on, so they will leave you alone while you're doing your 5 times a day praying towards Mecca thing. And apparently it works pretty well, so that's pretty cool. I thought that was funny because also I mentioned last time you weren't here. Um, Cats are also very popular in monasteries in the West because one of the things they do in monasteries, they keep a lot of grain because, well, for one, they make beer. Um, and grain brings rats, and the best way to keep out rats is to either have snakes, which could be a problem, or have cats, which is genuinely less of a problem. And apparently there's a documentary out there about like a monastery, and they'd all taken a vow of silence. So even in the documentary, there's not a lot of narration, but at one point, it's you're informed that the monks, while being under a vow of silence, are allowed to make essentially hear kitty kitty noises, so the cats will come to get food. You know, they can make psh, 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 psh noises. Yeah, that's very cool. That's very funny. It's like, but that's just how it rolls. I mean, and I've also like seen just genuinely a video of like a monk sitting out in the garden talking to a camera, and this cat walks from off screen and just goes under his robe. That's what he decides to do. And the monk just whatever. And not even Western monks, now that I think about it. I've seen Eastern monks with cats just like, oh, y'all are meditating? Cool, sit in your lap. So, yeah. They do what they want. 3, give charity. Okay, that's not a bad one. Fast daylight hours, which is to say the lunar month of Ramadan, because they use a lunar calendar, which was what most of the world was using at the time. The Gregorian calendar, which uses solar cycles, didn't come out until like the 1500s, I think. It was much later. So the Islamic calendar, or the Muslim, I guess Islamic Muslim, it doesn't matter. It's the same. They mean the same thing. The Islamic calendar and the Western calendar of the time were pretty close. So yeah, the fast daylight hours of the lunar month of Ramadan, which is not that different from a number of Jewish holidays, like there's like not Passover. What am I thinking? There's a couple of Jewish specific holidays where like it's about the lunar month and like the daytime, and then at night it technically doesn't count because sundown is part of like is considered the next day, something like that. I don't know. Again, old stuff. Yeah, yeah. Also that, yeah. My dad's made the joke when um, something was closed. Like, what is it? A Jewish holiday? It's like, Dad, we don't even live in New York. Like, that joke makes better sense in New York. We're in South Carolina. There aren't that many people. There aren't that many Jewish people here. Yeah, yeah. He's heard the joke. Um, and then finally, undergo a pilgrimage or a Hajj to Mecca once in a lifetime. This has been somewhat relaxed because of how big Islam has grown, and how far afield people live from Mecca. Um, Back when it was like they all lived in Arabia, taking a trip to Mecca wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, it was still a bit of a trip depending on where you lived in Arabia, but it was, you could walk there or like take a camel there, or I want to say, my brain wants to say wagon train, but that's a different place. Um, and then even like as they spread throughout North Africa and the far or the Near East, still we're on the same continent at least. But now it's like, if you've got people that are in poverty in like South America or something, getting to Mecca is going to be difficult. So like that's been relaxed. Also, getting that many people into one place at like one time a year is actually kind of dangerous. Um, yeah, but I mean, it just like from the aspect of like people getting crushed. It's like sports stadium level of like that many people crammed in the same place. Um, so they've had to modify some things just to deal with like modern numbers. Um, so Islam was made as a theocracy under the sacred rule or Sharia, deemed by legal scholars of the Quran. So that they treated the Quran like a constitution almost, where it's like, okay, well, this is our holy book and also technically our legal book, but the people who were running the show were legal scholars who would interpret the Quran as to what things needed to be. Because, I mean, obviously, um, God slash Allah wasn't writing messages in rock anymore. He kind of gave that up back then. For some reason, I guess not counting Joseph Smith, this is Mecca. I don't remember the name of the big cube, but the big cube's important. Um, that's where everyone is supposed to journey to at least once in their lifetime. Again, has been relaxed due to safety concerns. Um, but I think they've built like a sort of spiral staircase around it so they can keep people moving around it, and then they have like an off ramp so they can get people away without jamming people together. Because you can't just put people in this courtyard because there's just too damn many of them. There's just so many now. It's very difficult. There's a lot. It'd be like getting all the Catholics and Protestants all together in one place. That's a lot of people. I mean, hell, even all the people of like one denomination is a lot. Just look at a freaking megachurch. Now that said, well, I'll get to this in a minute. So by the time Muhammad died, Islam had taken over most of the Arabian Peninsula due to the fact that most of the desert tribes were diverse and had all these different, kind of going back to the Roman idea of noumena, just like all these real vague ideas of gods. Um, and so, like a single monolithic force of Allah was able to really unite them all. Now, also, we of course have jihad, which we've heard obviously in the last 2 decades. Um, Now, it has more than one meaning. It was, of course, the holy war that Muhammad carried out against the unbelievers, but it also can mean an individual's personal calling to conform to God's will. Because, well, you're human, so you're going to have your own desires and wants and et cetera, et cetera. But hey, we're all corrupt, terrible people, and we have to fight that in order to conform to God's perfect will. So it's not just an excuse to be afraid of Muslims. It's also like literally the internal battle of your own human will versus whatever divine plan there is. Within a century, Islam had pushed through Arabia, Persia, Jerusalem, Egypt, Carthage, and southern Spain. It had spread very quickly. And part of this was because of how Muhammad had suggested, at least, that Christians and Jews be treated. As I'd mentioned before, he saw them as kindred spirits, or as he put it, people of the book, because they were all reading from the same book, just maybe their book wasn't complete. Like I said, Judaism uses the Torah, which for Christianity is the Old Testament. Christianity uses the Old Testament and the New Testament, and for Islam, they've got the Quran, but they still use the Old and New Testaments. So, like, for them, everything that the Jews and Christians are using is still valid. It's just not complete. So when they went into these regions, here we go. I'm pointing at the screen like there's something up there. When they went into these regions where there were large populations of Jews and Christians, they just were like, okay, well, this is what we're doing. If you want the right religion in their minds, this is what we've got. But you can keep doing what you want if you feel like it, whatever. And that was fine. I think if you were a Muslim, you got a tax break. You had to pay more if you were Christian or Jewish, but that's not unusual. So yeah, things were not awful as this spread happened. Like, this wasn't the whole pre-crusade stuff yet. But then we had some issues. Obviously, once Muhammad died, there was the issue of who would be in charge. That's always going to happen. You get one powerful, charismatic ruler, and once they're gone, it becomes a problem as to who's in charge next. Which, again, is why games like, Civilization, you just have the one guy from the Stone Age to Space Age. You just don't worry about it. Don't ask why Gandhi's like 4,000 years old. Just fine. And also don't wonder why he's nuking everybody, apparently. Anyway, so this caused quite a bit of problems. Apparently there was a murder and an assassination of 2 leaders. I don't know what the difference is there. Like, at what point does a murder become an assassination? Because I feel like if they're political leaders, it should be considered an assassination. because it's for political reasons, right? I don't know. I don't know what the hard and fast definition is, but that's how the book describes it. Um, Maybe one dude just got like shanked in an alleyway, and he just so happened to be uh, one of these political leaders. I don't know. So we have a number of sects of Islam, which there's a few more, much smaller. Um, I think even a few more than that today. It's nothing like Protestantism, where there's literally thousands. um, but it's not just like this monolithic structure of all Muslims are in the same camp. So we have the Kharjirites. Only the purest and most deeply committed should be counted as Muslims. Very, very exclusive club, the Kharjirites, and therefore a very, very small and not very influential group, because you literally can't have a lot of people in that group. That's just how it works out. Um, it's like it's why stuff like Jehovah's Witnesses um, confound me, because in their minds only 144,000 people are going to heaven. Everybody else is fucked. 144,000. So why are there like at least a few million Jehovah's Witnesses? How does that work? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, I don't know what that's about. Um, then we have the Shias. They believe that their successors have divine will flowing through them. They're the main minority of Muslims, so they're the ones that believe that the leader is being divinely instructed by Allah, God, etc. Um, which again isn't that far off from how the Pope was seen. You know, the Pope, oh, he's infallible because God's working through him. Or even later on, where like all the monarchs were divinely appointed. So the idea of the Islamic ruler being divinely instructed by Allah isn't like that far-fetched. You know, you look at it from the outside, it's like, oh, they think their ruler has divine will. It's like, okay, what about the Pope? What about all the kings? Like, it's exactly the same. Anyway, we also then have the Sunnis, which are the largest group. Their leaders are human and fallible. They're considered defenders of the faith and caretakers of the law. So they're the most moderate, I would say, because if their leader does or says something that seems insane, they can just kick the guy out. They can just be like, no, this guy's lost his damn mind. He's no. Whereas if a Shia leader does or says something insane, guess that's what God wants. Now that is very much oversimplifying things, but that is kind of how things go. And in like a lot of the countries that are like Islamic ruled, like say Saudi Arabia, or Iraq really wasn't. I guess Iran still is. It's the Shias that are in charge, and the Sunnis are just like the regular folks. And the Shias tend to murder the Sunnis a lot. The Shias take power, they're in charge of the military, they're in charge of the police, and they really mistreat the Sunnis. And by mistreat, again, I mean like murder on the reg. Not that the Sunnis don't give back as good as they get, but typically the Shias are the ones that manage to really hold on to the reins of power in at least modern cases. So yeah, that's your crash course in Islam. That's pretty much as far as we're going to be going until we get to the Crusades, but that's what we're working with before we get there. But also, before we get back to Europe proper, let's just head on up to the Byzantine Empire. Um, so, with the various Islamic nations, because again, it's not a single monolithic power, uh, Islam spread across national borders, and regions became Islam without necessarily being allied with, say, Arabia. But they tended to share similar goals. And these various Islamic powers began pushing further north and east. Um, and this caused the Eastern Roman Empire to lose its hold on Egypt and Syria, which, I mean, obviously, it's right there next to Arabia. Um, In 1717, 1718, or 717 to 718, we're not nearly that far yet. Constantinople managed to push back an Islamic attack, and this was when, according to historians, again, it's typically more gradual, and it was more gradual than just this thing happened and now it's this. But this was definitely the moment things shifted more heavily. This is when it's considered that the Eastern Roman Empire truly became the Byzantine Empire, because it became more Greek than Latin. It was more concerned with Greek Orthodox Christianity, and it didn't have any concern with restoring the old Roman Empire because it was worried about surviving. It had danger right there to the south, and it couldn't be bothered with folks to the west. They were very busy. But since they were focusing on stuff at home, they became more and more Greek simply by focusing on where they were, which was Greece, more or less, as opposed to back in Latin Europe. Emperor Leo III did away with monasticism in the east so that he could tax the lands that the monasteries held. This was a pretty big deal. Now, granted, this didn't affect Russia, because Russia's big on their monasteries. I mean, even not so much today, because the whole Soviet Union thing dealt a pretty major blow to Russian Orthodoxy, but it's still pretty powerful. But down in the Byzantine Empire, monasticism was completely dismantled. Because they held a lot of land, but they were exempt from taxes. So the emperor's like, hey, you don't have monasteries anymore, so I'm going to tax your lands. Which is something that'll come up later as well. Also, the term iconoclasm, which is a thing not just with the Byzantine Empire, but also Islam. So Pope. There's a Pope Leo later as well. My brain's just like, oh, Pope Leo. Emperor Leo and his son Constantine V outlawed icons, which is to say pictures or symbols that represented God or Christ, as they were seen as idols. And this was one of the main reasons for the schism between the East and West churches. Because again, if you've ever been in a Catholic church or near a Catholic church or in the same city as a Catholic church, or just seen pictures of one, they like pictures of Jesus and sometimes God and like all the saints and just like the inside of a Catholic church is a picture book in stained glass, mind, but it's a big picture book. Leo and Constantine and a lot of the Greek Orthodoxy thinkers were like, this is idolatry. We're representing these divine figures in earthly form, and that's not okay. We don't like that. So they got rid of any images of God or Christ and saw the continued use of that in the West as a bad thing. Similarly, Islam is iconoclastic. You don't have pictures of Allah or Jesus, who is considered a prophet in Islam, or Muhammad. There are no pictures, supposed to be no pictures, of any of these, my brain almost said biblical, Quranic? I don't know, any of their holy characters, because they are, like with the Greek Orthodox, seen as being idolatic? Whatever. Seen as being idols. So here's this big battle between Constantinople and the invading Islamic forces. They managed to push them back. It will not be the last time. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I was trying to remember if this was the time that this happened. Connor, knowing what you watch, you may recognize this. Do you know what they're using here? Well, they called it Greek fire, but yeah. Yeah, that's napalm. That's straight up napalm. Yeah, that's horrific. Did you see the MythBusters episode where they built one of these? Yeah. So it's a simple hand pump. I mean, you can see them here, like pumping the thing, and it spits out like this jelly fluid that sticks to the enemy ship and to the enemy soldiers. And when it's lit on fire, it stays on fire. The guys falling in the water, they're going to keep burning under the water. This stuff is bad. Now, granted, this is also extremely dangerous because if that fire manages to get through a seal and gets back into this whole thing is exploding and these boys are in trouble. But when it works right, it's horrific. Now, granted, it wasn't like a... We won't complain about it, yeah. And it also wasn't like a super great weapon. It didn't work that great all the time. It didn't have really good range. But it was terrifying. Because you're fighting an enemy ship and you're thinking, oh, they're going to shoot arrows at us or throw, javelins, normal stuff. And then the front of their ship starts shooting fire at you. No, we're going home. Forget it.
It's not even like shooting fire. The way napalm is, it's more like a throwing flaming sludge at you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which is how actual flamethrowers work. Like if you see a flamethrower in a movie, that's just propane. It's a gas. That's why it like plumes out. If they're more accurate, it looks like it's gel or sludge. Yeah, and then that's on fire. Yeah. Yeah.
More scary than just shooting fire with a lighter, it shoots flaming liquid at you.
That sticks to you. Yeah. And then it doesn't stop burning until it's burned out. Like there's no patting it out, there's no jumping in the water, it will still burn. It's oof. I hate to be the guy that discovered how that worked. I won't stop burning, kick it over. Oh shit. Yeah. And then of course they had catapults and whatnot too. Well, I guess technically that's is that a trebuchet?
There's a bunch of dangerous stuff that burns really hot, which is also really easy to make.
That is true. That is true.
Like, do you know what thermite is? It's just rust and aluminum.
Oh, yeah, that's not good.
You can scrape rust off your table and grab some wooden shavings from a different piece of metal and you mix them.
Thermite burns real hot.
It does about 3 pounds of Celsius.
Yeah.
And it just leaves with ores of molten aluminum.
That's the sort of thing that you use to, like, bust into bank vaults and whatnot. It can burn through some stuff. There's Leo. Now, granted, no pictures of God or Jesus or whatever, but they did still symbol things. So symbols were cool. Symbols were fine. That's why you see in any, like we saw the picture of Hagia Sophia before with like the various Islamic symbols in there. That's fine. All right, on to what really is, I would argue, the main part of this chapter, and that is the rise of the Carolingians. So, as we said, turmoil between the Merovingian heirs caused the mayors of the palace to gain more power. The mayors of the palace being royal officials that really did all the work that the king was supposed to be doing, but just didn't have the royal bloodline. Especially during the so-called time of the do-nothing kings. Boy, I wonder what happened then. I imagine it probably sounds fancier in Old Latin. So as we also mentioned, the most powerful of these mayors of the palace was Pepin of Heristal. 687, he defeated the non-Carolingian mayors of two other territories, and basically ruled over Francia. Not technically, because he wasn't the king, but on paper. Well, let me rephrase that. On paper, he wasn't ruling over all of Francia, but like in actuality, he was. But because of how kingship works and whatnot, you still have to have like some level of legitimacy in order to stake your claim as some royalty. Blah blah blah. So then we have his son, Charles the Hammer Martel. That's a name. He was called this because of his victory over the Muslims between Tours and Poitiers. Managed to push the Muslims back from France and back into Spain, where they stayed until like the 1400s. And he ruled without a Merovingian king until his death in 741. So, while he was in charge, again, technically mayor of the palace, he still wasn't king because he wasn't royal blood, is whatever sense that makes. But there were no Merovingian kings in charge because I guess they had died without heirs and whatever. Nobody cared. And because he had done this thing of protecting Europe from the Muslims, everyone just followed him without question. Plus, they did this really cool painting of it, which is pretty neat. Now, obviously, a lot of it is a bit of propaganda. I don't know why we've got like a random. I think this lady here probably represents like Western civilization and Islam shrine. I don't. This doesn't look like a Arabian dude though. I don't know. Now he's got that curved sword going on, so I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to represent. Probably, actually, now that I think about it, the folks that would have been pushing into France would have been Moors, which were Spanish. So yeah, I guess they look more Spanish. Anyway, yeah, it's like, oh, there's these barbarians pushing in to take our civilization. It's like, okay. I mean, what have y'all been doing? All right. So this leads to, obviously, Charles died, and his two sons take over, Carloman and Pepin. So they split France in half, or Francia, again, in half. And unlike their father, they weren't able to rule without a Merovingian figurehead, because while they were decent rulers, they didn't have the respect of the people that their father did. So they went and found Childeric III, who was like this illiterate. I don't know if he was even fully sane. Dude, like living in the woods, but technically he was related to whoever the last Merovingian king was. So they made him king so they'd have a figurehead. In 747, as the book puts it, Carloman retired to become a monk so that Pepin could take control of Francia. Now, this does mean that Carloman wasn't murdered. It's not. This isn't a euphemism for, went to a farm upstate. He did retire and become a monk, but I'm pretty sure it was like there was a threat. You can either retire and become a monk, or you will retire to a farm upstate. So Carloman decided to do the smart thing and just bow out and let his brother take over. So in 751, he went down to Rome and spoke to the Pope, using his connections there to basically ask the Pope, hey, so who should be king? The person who's doing the work of the king, or the person with the title? Now, not only was this a pretty easy question to answer, but Pepin also had handed the Pope quite a bit of gold before this question. So, it was a bit of a weighty question. Also, in 755, he crossed the Alps to attack the Lombards and gave the land in central Italy to the church, which we'll get to the donation of Constantine a little bit later, which is kind of essentially what the current, papal palace is today. It's more than what the papal palace is today, but it's the beginning of the papal states, which are like their own little country within Italy. So here's Pepin the Short. Kind of a shame that the Short is his moniker when his father was the Hammer, but what are you gonna do? Still though, because however this crap works, Pepin wasn't king. But his bloodline was now made royal, I guess. So his son would be made king. So the first king of this new line was Charlemagne, which is French for Charles the Great. So under the rule of Charlemagne, Frankish kingdoms expanded dramatically. pushed into land formerly ruled by pagan tribes, and his goal was not only to take land, but to make them Christian. And this had mixed results. There are lots of stories of Charlemagne rolling into these various villages, and if they put up a fight, cutting anyone down that resisted, and then those that were left, basically, tying their arms behind their backs and putting them on their knees by the river, and putting a sword in their throat and saying, "Hey, you can either accept God or we'll send you to meet him." And if they don't accept, they get their throats cut and thrown in the river. And there were many reports of rivers being red with the blood of villages he slaughtered in his work to Christianize them. So yeah, early Crusades, I guess. Also, his armies were becoming more properly medieval. These were no longer the remnants of Rome. Things were becoming this. I would almost argue this would be really the true proper beginning of the Middle Ages, but I'll take 476. Anyway, we had infantry, we had heavy cavalry, we also had stirrups now. We didn't have stirrups before this point. If you were on a horse, you held on with your glutes, and you hope for the best. But now we had stirrups so that knights could lean into their weapon and use lances and such against the enemy. Before, you would use a bow, like with the Huns. Typically, if you had a sword, it would be used to command the infantry forward in battle. Sometimes you would hit guys as you're going by. If you recall from the Hannibal video, there was one particular scene where there was a guy on a horse and he had another guy behind him who was holding on to him, and the guy in the back had the sword. So the guy in the front was controlling the horse because he had to use both his hands and was keeping himself stable, while the guy in the back was holding on to the guy who was stable and was swinging the sword. That was more common. But now with stirrups, you could have we're still not quite to proper heavy knights like you see in Middle Age movies, but we're very much getting there. More heavily armed, more heavily armored, really turning cavalry into dangerous parts of the battlefield. Also, those that fought for him were given tracts of land. Those that fought for him were known as his vassals, and they were given this land to repay the debt that they owed to their liege lord. Also, and this is going to be pretty much the rest of the semester, there was a constant back and forth between the government and the church over who was running things in the church. For Constantinople, wow, brain. For Charlemagne, he controlled the church like a branch of the government. He had royal officials, the Missi Dominici, known as the Lords officials. They went out to administer justice. They would go out in pairs. One would be secular, one would be ecclesiastical, where they would go and check out, they had capitularies that were royal laws issued in chapters, which were known as capitula, hence capitularies, which would override local laws or regional laws, same thing. So like it's like the federal law overriding whatever the local law is, and they would come in. One would go and make sure the church was doing what they were supposed to do. The other would make sure that the local count or whatever was doing what they were supposed to do. Um, you didn't want these people to come knocking because they would find something wrong. It's like being audited. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, they might find something. So just don't. Just don't. And important date because it's easy. The year 800, he was crowned as emperor of a new Roman Empire, which pissed off Constantinople because they're what the hell? They're technically the Roman Empire. What's this all about? Also, he's a barbarian in their minds. He's a Germanic warlord. Technically, he's only like a few generations removed from Clovis, while not technically the same family line. It's only been a few generations since Clovis. Also, as an extra little hint here, or an extra little bit of information, it was on Christmas Day 800 that he was crowned emperor of a new Roman Empire. So he was like going full. Oh, see, all this is in my head, and I keep forgetting. It's like I don't have it written down, so it's not going to. He went to the Pope to be crowned Roman Emperor, like the new Holy Roman Emperor. So he went there on Christmas Day. Supposedly, there's this whole thing about like. Let me see if it's written here. It doesn't say. But supposedly, like, Charlemagne and his men were going to Rome for like a Christmas feast or something. They were just going to hang out with the Pope. It wasn't going to be a big thing. And then, I'm so surprised. I've been named emperor of a new Roman Empire. Like, that's bull crap. He knew what was going on. Like, nobody. There was no confusion about this. He just acted, surprised and humbled, and he's one of the greatest rulers in European history. Of course, he's going to be a little tricksy about it, because this same thing happens with Napoleon. Except Napoleon is like way more narcissistic about it. We'll talk about that next semester. So yeah, here is Charlemagne's empire. Again, France, basically, reaching into parts of Germany. It's reaching past the Rhine River, into bits of you've got Bavaria there, and into northern Italy. But by and large, it's France. All right, let's get a little further. So Charlemagne knew that in order to really be the whole new Roman Empire, he was going to have to do more than just have, a big empire. He filled his court with learned men from all over Europe. They were advisors and administrators. They boosted intellectual standard. To use the quote from the Dark Ages documentary, they brought light back to Europe. Not that there wasn't still light in Europe, because there was, but they made it brighter for Europe. There was more going on. Now, nearly all of these men were from the church, because the church was where most of the education was. As we've seen with the monasteries, that's where the reading and writing still existed, because most people in Europe were illiterate to no fault of their own, because they were just trying to survive. I mean, we barely even had cities anymore. Let me rephrase that. We barely had towns anymore. So yeah, there was very little in the way of education outside of going to be in a monastery and learning to read and write, but you're only doing that because you're doing the manuscripts. One such of these intellectuals was Einhard. Einhard was the guy who wrote Charlemagne's biography. He's the reason we know most of the details that we do know. He wrote a pretty detailed biography on Charlemagne. Now, obviously, taking everything from one source isn't great, but it's pretty nice to have a source that was contemporary. Like, the dude was right there with Charlemagne as he was alive, rather than, 20, 60, 80, 100 years later. He was also the supervisor for the construction of the chapel complex at Aachen, which is where Charlemagne made his capital. So the capital of the new Roman Empire wasn't in Rome, because that's where the papacy was. It was instead in Aachen, which is up here. So way north in Europe, really, relatively speaking. I mean, way north in France at least. About equal with London in terms of northernness. So here's Life of Charlemagne by Einhard, obviously translated to English, because they sure as hell weren't writing English back then. Oh, wait, I missed one. Caroline Minuscule. I was thinking, where's the Caroline Minuscule at? Caroline Minuscule was a standardized form of writing, a script that emphasized space between letters so that they would be more legible, which is important for reading, because, well, if you're writing with a quill, where you have to dip it, to get ink back in it after every little bit, cursive's going to make more sense, because you can just leave the quill on the page and just, write it in one long flowing thing. But that's not super legible all the time. So Caroline Minuscule, this, is, I don't want to go as far as to say it's like print today, but it's the start of that, where each letter is separate to make it easier to read. The letters aren't all flowing together, where, a bump here is that an N, or is that just where they curved, the L into the next letter or something? So, yeah. Now, granted, still very curvy, still very close together. Some of them still very much run together, but a lot more literate than, or legible, I should say, than a lot of the other ones. And there's Aachen. It's a really nice church, actually. On the inside, we'll finish after this slide, but I don't know how familiar you are with architecture, but tell me what's wrong with this image. Is it raining? No, that's the air conditioner. Okay. I I'll say that's why I was like, why does it sound like that? What do you see wrong with the architecture here? I mean, not so much like nothing's in danger of falling over, but like there's stuff that doesn't need to be there. Okay, I'll turn this off. Maybe you see better. Right. Look at it closely at the pillars at the top. What are they holding up? Are they though? They're not touching. Also, yeah, arches don't need to be held up. But yeah, also the. Ow, it's the wrong one. My eyes. Okay. Yeah. These don't need to be. These aren't touching. These aren't making contact at all. These are just here for pure looks. Which, fair, but at least these down here look like they're doing something. But this is still unnecessary. But that's like, we're trying to be like the Romans. We're going to have all the columns and stuff. So that's what that's about. That's what's going on there. But you also have like these vaulted ceilings, which are really cool. Again, at least during this time period, it's like I keep saying architectural wonder that they were able to do this in what was considered, the Dark Ages. Because things weren't as bad back then as people of the Renaissance like to think they were. And then, of course, stained glass, which I think was put in later, because stained glass becomes a thing a little bit later. A lot of gold leaf. Very, very pretty. But my professor made fun of the columns back when I was in undergrad, and now I have to bring it up because it's very funny when you see it. Because, again, these columns don't need to be here because the arch is like that keystone does the job. These columns are doing nothing. They're just hanging out, looking pretty. But, whatever. That's the point, I guess, is to be there and look pretty. Yeah, true. Oh, that's amazing.
Because well, there was like two buildings that were in the way.
Oh, I have one more.
So they had the basic tower less wide and long as the rest of the tower. So it was thin on the bottom and bigger up top.
They've never played Jenga.
Yeah, they never played Jenga. Because according to the designs, it would have worked. But I was gonna realize designers don't always give things. First off, there was a Category 4 hurricane coming to the city.
Yep.
And also, the construction crew cheaped out on material.
Oh, good.
Because they were meant to weld the metal bars together for it, but instead they just bolted them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't provide the support for the tower that is. If a architecture student didn't notice that when they were walking by it, it could have just
Toppled into the middle of a very dense city.
It's also domino effect because it's nice and bridge.
That's true.
Topples, the next tower, topples, the next.
Uh,
It wouldn't have just went down like the Trade Center.
Right.
It would have toppled to the side.
Yeah.
Which is way
Fallen like a felled tree.
Yeah.
This is the pipe organ, which is also extremely fancy. more minuscule. This one's especially very. The letters are apart, so you can see them. Okay. I kept you ever slightly. You can take off. And I'll see you Monday. We'll definitely finish this chapter and we'll start the next one.